I want to be clear. The reason that these numbers skip in your diagram, they don't go directly in order, right? Not every single number is in order on this left-hand column, because this is only a diagram of when triggering events occur, right?
Yes.
Something unusual about the operation of the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And it's clear that from the data, there was no triggering event at key cycle 1159, was there?
No.
Welcome back to Fair and Square Files, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Well, if you're anything like me, you are hooked on the Karen Reid case. With every passing week, this trial seems to add another layer of intrigue and fascination. I mean, I don't know about you, but at this point I am made of questions. The comments from our amazing community continue to astonish us with their insightful theories and specialized expertise. It truly is incredible contributions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I'll keep this quite brief because we're going to launch straight into this one. This one's eagerly anticipated by me anyway. Now, once again, we're going to witness Alan Jackson applying relentless pressure on a visibly uncomfortable Joe Paul. Despite his role as an expert, Paul seems to lack confidence in his answers, moving 2 steps forward and, at times, 2 back. Is he totally out of his depth and aware of the shortcomings in this investigation? Or is he following close orders and trying to align the scene or evidence with information provided by his colleagues or superiors? He thought it wise to break this cross-examination up into a couple of parts just to make the information easier to digest. And if you haven't already, if you could hit that big red button, that would be amazing. Thank you so, so much. We really appreciate it. Right, let's crack into it.
Let's get back to the path of travel when you began your analysis. How did you know what the Lexus's path of travel was that day?
I got the directions from Trooper Proctor.
And what did Trooper Proctor tell you in terms of the path of travel specifically? Starting point and an ending point, tell you the exact path Lexus traveled.
No, all I got was mostly just the addresses.
Okay, so if you've got 2 points on a map, and Trooper Proctor told you Lexus traveled from point A to point B, there are multiple ways to get from point A to point B. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes.
You picked one of those, right? The path of travel includes freeways, etc., right?
Yes.
But as you sit here, you don't know what her actual path of travel was, because it could have been something different, right?
It could have been something. That's why I gave a range on my diagram.
Do you have any scientific evidence to establish what her actual path of travel is, or did you just guess at the path of travel?
I got the addresses from Trooper Proctor. I put them into the thing, and then one of the possibilities of 36 miles, and that was after looking at all of them, at 36 miles is a possibility.
Right, understood. So that's what I'm trying to get to, Trooper Paul.
Okay.
That's one possibility. There was 36 miles, one route of travel, right?
Correct.
There were other possibilities, right?
Yes.
So between and among the possibility that you picked and the other possibilities, you just sort of had to guess. And there's no science to it. You just said, I'm going to pick that and put it in my report, right?
No, that's not how that works.
Okay, why don't you tell me how that works?
Her odometer mileage on the car from the download and the time we had the vehicle shows 36 miles. So when I plugged those addresses into Google, it came up as 36 miles as a possibility.
And you knew that there was another route of travel to the same location, correct?
What do you mean?
There were alternative routes of travel to the same 2 points, from and to the same points, correct?
Yes. Yes.
You could have tried to extract the location data from Ms. Reed's cell phone to determine the exact route of travel, correct?
I don't know. I don't have access to do cell phone extractions.
So that answers my next question. You did not even attempt to do that, did you?
No.
You did attempt to analyze the key cycles for the Lexus in order to determine placement of that vehicle. You just talked about that with Mr. Lauper, right?
Yes.
I want to be clear for the jurors because most people have probably never heard of key cycles. A key cycle does not have any location data associated with it whatsoever, does it?
Correct.
It just shows you when a vehicle is turned on, the ignition is on, and off. That's one cycle, correct?
No.
Tell me what I've got wrong.
Key cycle, the car doesn't have to be turned on.
Say that again.
It goes from off to run. The engine does not have to be started to off.
Understood. So if it turns on, well, every single ignition is a key cycle. Every time the engine turns on, that's absolutely a key cycle. Once it's turned off again, right?
That gets recorded as an ignition cycle.
Right. So a key cycle can be an ignition cycle, but it doesn't have to be an ignition cycle. It also can be just turning the sort of accessory on, right?
The key cycles turn the accessories on.
All right. But it does, my question was, and where we started with this conversation is, it does not have any location data on it whatsoever.
Correct.
All right. So when you drive your car, you walk out, get in the car, turn the ignition on, start to drive, get your location, turn it off. That's one key cycle, right?
One ignition cycle.
But and I'm going to use the word key cycles because you use the word key cycles in your report. That's what we're talking about.
I'm using that because that's how the trigger was read.
That's how what?
The triggers were read on the text stream. That's how they read them, key cycles.
By key cycles.
Yes.
I'm going to use that phrase key cycle.
Okay.
We're talking about the same thing. It's an ignition on, ignition off cycle.
Doesn't have to be on.
So you mean the engine doesn't have to be turned on?
Correct.
Right. But if you're seeing triggering events, not trying to be tricky here, seeing triggering events, the car's in motion, what does that tell you? The ignition's on or off?
The ignition is on.
Right. That's what I'm getting to. But it has no location data associated with whatsoever. It could be here, it could be in Wyoming. The car wouldn't know the difference. It's not going to report the difference to you, correct?
On the key cycle,
Right.
On just the key cycle. The key cycle does not give out locations.
Say that again?
The key cycle does not give a location.
Right. So your analysis is trying to go from a known key cycle that you can figure out and then work backward from there to try to figure out where the car was on a particular ignition cycle or key cycle, correct?
I didn't use the key cycle to put it back.
Say that again?
I did not use the key cycle to place the car back in its location. The key cycles were, all I got from the key cycles is that they occurred close within proximity to the time we've had the vehicle, not basically saying that this was the location based off the key cycle.
Well, let's look at Exhibit 591 with the court's permission.
Okay.
Did you testify on Friday that this is a copy of the exhibit that was put in 591? This is part of your report, correct?
Yes, it is.
And this is a chart that shows when move to this arrow. That arrow indicates top and bottom where your testing occurred, correct?
Yes.
And we move over to the left. That is key cycle what?
1164.
Right. So you've testified, and we can turn the lights on. Your Honor, I don't mind if that stays up. We can turn the lights on. I don't think it hurts anything. You stated in your report that there were, quote, 2 triggers recorded on odometer 12629 and key cycle 1162, correct?
Yes.
These events were prior to the testing triggers on odometer readings 12665/12666 and at key cycle 1164. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're saying, what you're saying in that report is the triggering events were at 1162, going in reverse in order. 1162 comes before 1164. They're numerical. Is that right?
Yes.
Every single key cycle just tags another number on top of it, right? There's no formula.
Correct.
After 1 comes 2, after 2 comes 3, 4, 5, 6, and then move on, right?
Yes.
So by the time you got the vehicle, there had been 1,164 key cycles on the history of that car, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you knew, and you put in your report, or you know, that the triggering events that you see under 1164, those are yours,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's your testing.
Yes.
And you were very clear that the triggers that you recorded, that you talked to Mr. Lally about, were two cycles before that.
Yes.
Meaning ignition cycles, at least, right?
Yes.
All right.
For that.
You report, let me finish your point. You said that the mileage difference between these two triggers and the triggers that occurred while testing was 36 miles. You just said that, right?
Yes.
And the key cycle difference was exactly 2 key cycles, right?
Yes.
1164, 1163, 1162. That's the triggering events, correct?
That's correct.
You also reiterated in your report in paragraph 23, 24, 26, and 29, and also in this exhibit in your CARS report, that the triggers occurred at key cycle 1162, right?
Yes.
You were assisted in your CARS report, I think you mentioned Trooper Zach Clark, is that right?
Yes.
Trooper Proctor assisted to a certain degree, correct?
Yes.
Trooper Larini, Carol Larini, is that right?
Yes.
Also Sergeant Sean Good of Canton PD assisted as well, correct?
Yes, in a sense.
Did they all read the report before it was finalized?
No.
Did you have any supervisor read the report before it was finalized?
Yes.
And he agreed with the assessments in the report?
Yes.
So in summary, everybody that read the report and you who authored the report believed, and it's reflected in that report, that key cycle 1162 contained the 2 triggers that you're talking about, right?
Yes.
That's the 3-point turn, I guess it's now a 3-point turn, right? Changing direction, and then
Yes.
the reverse at 24 miles per hour, correct?
Correct.
And you even went on and testified to that exact thing under oath in front of the state grand jury, correct?
Yes. Wait, hold on. I need the text streams?
On the key cycles.
Not in grand jury.
Okay. Testified to it on direct examination on Friday and again this morning.
Yes, correct.
If your testing occurred at key cycle 1164, that means you turned the engine on, the ignition on to start your testing, correct?
Correct.
And that triggering event that we see up there at 1164 initiated your testing, is that right?
Yes.
All right. So that 1164 is where that's where there's no more unknowns, in other words. Right? You know exactly where the car is, who's in the car, who turned the car on, and what the triggering events were and what they reflected, because you did it, correct?
Correct.
It's you.
Yes.
So that would be the cornerstone, basically, of your entire analysis of the key cycles.
Say again?
The cornerstone, in other words, the one known that is immovable, it's immutable, is 1164 began your testing. Is that right?
Objection.
Is that right? I'm going to allow the question.
Yeah, that's when the car was in state custody.
All right. So starting at 1164 and counting backward, before you started your testing, you know that the SUV had to be started, the ignition had to be turned over, and it was driven to the Sally Port in Canton at 5:31 p.m. from a tow truck on January 29th, correct?
I didn't know that.
You did or did not?
Did not know that.
Okay. Assuming that the car had to be started and put on a tow truck, that would be key cycle what?
I don't know how. I can't speak to the fact that recorded a key cycle at that time.
I can't hear you.
I can't speak to the fact that we record a key cycle at that time.
Okay. If the car was turned on and driven onto a tow truck, would that be a key cycle?
I don't know because these keys record different ways, so I can't speak to how or why it did not record on there. All I can speak to is that those are the key cycles, the odometer mileage is more what I was going after on this whole thing.
Trooper Paul, you just said unequivocally, when a car is turned on and then turned off, there's a key cycle.
I said when the car without the ignition on, that's a key cycle.
Right.
That's correct.
That's what I mean, when it's turned on, when the engine turns on.
That's the definition of what it is. I can't speak to why I didn't go on, why I did not record.
Well, let's talk about the ignition cycles
Okay.
before 1164. Okay?
Okay.
Obviously, the car had to get to Canton PD because you saw it there, correct?
Correct.
Assume for purposes of my question, the car was turned on, and there's a video of it turning on, driving up onto a flatbed tow truck.
Yes.
That would be ignition cycle, I'm going to use your word, key cycle, ignition cycle, 1163, correct?
Again, ignition cycle, key cycles are two different things.
Which word do you want me to use?
If you want to talk about key cycles, key cycles. If you want to talk about ignition cycles, it's ignition cycles when the vehicle gets turned on. A key cycle does not mean to be turned on.
But every single ignition cycle includes a key cycle. You can't have an ignition cycle without a key cycle, correct?
Well, if you want to talk about it, just use the key cycles or ignition cycles. I'm trying to make sure this gets out. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure that this gets put out the correct way.
Every ignition cycle includes a key cycle, correct?
In a sense,
By definition, it has to, right?
it doesn't have to. They record multiple different ways.
You can have an ignition cycle without a key cycle.
I don't know how it recorded, but it could happen.
Explain that. How could that possibly happen?
Because a key cycle is when it turns on, not engine running, and then turns off.
Okay, so work with me here.
Ignition cycle is when it turns on, engine running for 2 seconds, and then comes off.
Okay, so
Or the 2 seconds, if it's not on long enough, it might not record one.
okay, let's ignore the 2 seconds.
Okay.
That's not what we're doing.
Okay.
All right. Let's assume that it's an old-fashioned type of key.
Okay.
Okay? Halfway on, the electricity is on. It's like it used to be called ACC. Accessories,
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
That's a key cycle, correct?
For that intensive purpose, yes. This vehicle's not a key cycle. It's not a
It
thing.
keep turning,
Okay.
and that turns the engine on, right?
It turns the engine on, correct.
An ignition cycle, right?
Yes. Well, then turns off.
So ignition cycle necessarily includes the precursor key cycle, correct? Even though every key cycle might not include an ignition cycle. Would you agree with that?
In that scenario, yes.
Fine. Okay, with that definition, I want to talk about ignition cycles because I don't want to get confused about accessories. Just assume the engine.
Okay.
turns on, all right?
Okay.
If you started your testing at 1164, then if the engine was turned on, thereby initiating a key cycle, driving the car onto a flatbed truck, and then hauling it over to Canton PD, that would be key cycle 1163 in that hypothetical, correct?
It could be.
Okay. Then going backward from there, if the SUV was, I'm sorry, let me add one event that I just forgot. It had to get off the tow truck in Canton and be driven into the Sally Port. Did you ever see that video?
No.
Being driven in?
No.
If there was a video showing that the car was actually driven into the Sally Port, that would necessarily be a key cycle, correct?
Possibly.
Okay, so that would be key cycle 1163. My mistake, I was missing one, right?
Okay.
Before that, if the car was turned on and driven onto the flatbed to get to Canton, that would be key cycle 1162 in order, correct? We're going backward.
It's possible.
All right. Before that, if the car was started and the car was driven from One Meadows Avenue to Karen Reed's parents' home in Dighton, that would be another key cycle, 1161, correct?
They're possible.
Before that, if the SUV was started and driven by Miss Reed from the garage at John O'Keefe's house to Jennifer McCabe's house at 5:07 in the morning, that would be another key cycle, correct? 1160. Is that right?
It's possible.
And before that, if the SUV was started and driven by Miss Reed to the waterfall, from the waterfall to 34 Fairview at approximately 12:15 a.m., that would be another key cycle, 11:59, right?
It's possible.
I want to be clear. The reason that these numbers skip in your diagram, they don't go directly in order, right? Not every single number is in order on this left-hand column, because this is only a diagram of when triggering events occur, right?
Yes.
Something unusual about the operation of the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And it's clear that from the data, there was no triggering event at key cycle 1159, was there?
No.
So assuming the driving events that I just told you, right? Assuming for purposes of my question, that the driving events started at 11:59, driving over to 34 Fairview from the waterfall. Then driving at 5:07 in the morning over to Jen McCabe's house, 11:60. Then driving to Dayton, her parents' house, 11:61. Then the car being seized in Dayton by Trooper Proctor, 11:62. Then the car being taken off the flatbed and driven into the Sally Port at Canton, 11:63. Your testing starts at 11:64. That would mean that at 11:62, that key cycle would include the time in which Trooper Proctor had possession of that car, correct?
No.
Assuming my hypothetical.
Your hypothetical?
Yes.
If that's hypothetically how it works, then yes.
Then what?
If that's hypothetically how it works, then yes.
On June 9th, 2022, you were asked by a grand jury whether you knew or had done any scientific testing to determine the distance a body would actually travel struck by a vehicle. Remember that?
Not that specifically. Not in that way.
Do you remember answering that you had not, I'm just paraphrasing, that you had not done you hadn't finished your report yet?
Why don't you show him? He said he didn't remember it that way.
May I?
Yes.
Take a look at middle of the page. Your answer starts at about line 12, but the question above it is probably informative. You have that in mind?
Yep.
May I approach?
Yes.
You were asked, does that remind you that you were asked by a grand juror if you could calculate how far a body would move having been struck by a vehicle?
Yes.
And you indicated, quote, yeah, there's certain calculations we can do with that. Would figure out if the car backed up, hit somebody, and then they go a certain amount of distance, and it's based on miles per hour, the speed of the vehicle, the striking vehicle, and stuff. Remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by stuff?
I don't know.
You said that the calculations would be based on miles per hour and stuff. Did you ever do any stuff to test that? The grand jury's question.
No, we cannot calculate anything from this collision.
Say that one more time.
We cannot calculate anything from this collision.
Who's we?
I'm sorry, me, the role me.
Well, you know John O'Keefe's weight, right?
What's that?
You know John O'Keefe's weight, 217 pounds, right?
Yes.
Did you know that?
I don't know his weight, no.
You know the weight of the vehicle?
Yes.
What's the weight of the vehicle, gross weight?
What's the gross weight?
Yeah.
I think it's approximately 7,300 pounds.
Okay. Were you able to calculate the mass of the vehicle?
I did not calculate the mass of the vehicle.
Well, you told the grand jury that you were planning on doing that kind of stuff to calculate how far a person would travel being struck at that speed with a car of that weight. You didn't do those calculations?
No, because the calculations would vastly underestimate the speed of the vehicle.
You testified, again, my report isn't done yet. I'm going to look into it. I'm looking into all that stuff, end quote, correct?
Yes.
There's that word again. It's been more than 2 years since that statement at the grand jury. Is your report finished?
Yes, it is.
Did you engage in any of those calculations?
I looked into it. This type of collision I would not be able to use the formulas for this type of collision.
Well, let's talk about those formulas. How would you calculate how far a body at rest would travel after being struck by an object in motion? How would you calculate that?
In pedestrian collisions, I use a Searle throw formula.
A what formula?
Searle.
What does that mean?
It's a type of formula that would use for a calculation of post-impact
So
or speeds for pedestrians.
that includes certain principles of physics to calculate that, right?
What do you mean?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by certain forms of physics?
There would be physics calculations that would be required to figure out how far a body at rest would move having been struck by an object in motion.
Right.
That's a basic principle of
Yeah, I guess you could say though.
All right. Can you describe for the jurors exactly what calculations you would need to employ to determine how far a body at rest would travel, having been struck by an object in motion?
So, in this scenario, in this collision, it's more of a side swipe. So he did not he did not get enough speed of the vehicle post impact with the vehicle to be able calculations. His center of mass was offset from the vehicle. So we would vastly underestimate his speed. So that's why I did not do a formula. If he was more in line with behind the vehicle, he would have been projected forward, and using that projection forward, he would have been able to get more closer to the actual speed of the vehicle during that post-impact travels.
Well, that presumes a couple of things, Trooper Paul. That presumes that he was quote unquote sideswiped, right?
Presumed?
Presumed by you. You didn't see how he was hit, did you?
Based on the evidence, it appeared to be a side swipe.
That's your opinion.
That's just reading the evidence.
You're saying that the principles of physics as we know them today in modern mathematics is thwarted by a sideswipe?
Objection.
Is that what you're saying?
The calculations that are out there, you can get a speed, it would just underestimate the speed.
You would have to know what the initial momentum of the object is that's in motion, correct?
Of what object?
The truck, Paul.
I would have to know that speed.
Yeah, you'd have to know what the initial momentum is, not speed, momentum. There's a difference,
Okay.
right? Would you agree with that?
No.
You wouldn't have to calculate what the initial momentum is of the object in motion to determine the distance of the body at rest would move?
Well, in that sense, are we talking about I'm trying to find the speed of the vehicle? That's usually what we're trying to do.
Right, okay. Well, let's put the speed of the vehicle aside. Let's talk about initial momentum. What's the formula for calculating initial momentum?
There's different types of momentum formulas.
Well, there's actually one type of momentum formula. It's to calculate momentum.
Objection.
Sustained.
To calculate momentum, there is a singular.
So sustained. Ask it differently.
Isn't it true, Trooper Paul, that there is a singular calculation for determining initial momentum? That is P equals M times V, where P is the momentum. You're solving for that. M is mass. You multiply that by velocity. Is that right? Pretty simple.
You wouldn't use that in a pedestrian collision.
Oh, because the pedestrian's somehow magically out of the realm of physics?
Objection.
Sustained.
Is the pedestrian out of the realm of physics and calculations?
No, it's the weight differential between the pedestrian and the vehicle.
So if the vehicle is too heavy and the body is too light, you can't calculate the initial momentum of the vehicle?
Yes.
Got it. Where'd you learn that?
It's in my math class. We only use momentum for a vehicle to vehicle.
Math class?
The math, the crash reconstruction classes I have taken.
Got it. Would you need to apply the theory of conservation of momentum in calculating these data?
Do I need to calculate the conservation of momentum?
Heard of conservation of momentum?
Yes.
Even know what that is? There's an equation for that as well, right?
Yes.
You know what that is?
Not off the top of my head, but yes.
Based on the basic principles of physics, is the total momentum of the collision greater or less than the total momentum after the collision? Total momentum before the collision, is it greater or less than the total momentum after the collision? Basic question.
What type of collision?
Trooper Paul, they're exactly equal in all respects under the principles of physics, right? That's the theory of the conservation of momentum. Momentum doesn't change. It's
Yes.
transferred from one body to another,
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
Why didn't you say that to the jurors?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Trooper Paul, if you were qualified to, quote, look into all this stuff, you would probably know these answers, wouldn't you?
Objection.
Sustained.
Are there any other calculations that you'd need to figure out the stuff that you were talking to about with the grand jury?
Objection.
Sustained.
How about calculating the final velocity of the objects after the collision? Would that be important?
What objects?
That would be John O'Keefe's body, sir.
The
Object
I don't.
that you claim was flying through the air 30 feet.
Okay.
Objection.
Sustained.
How about calculating the displacement using kinematic equations? Would you be able to do that?
The displacement of the body.
In order to calculate how far the body would move based on the mass of the object striking the body, could you use displacement using kinematic equations?
So, like I said before, the side swipe, he would not have gotten 100% of the vehicle, 100% of the speed of the striking vehicle. It would have vastly underestimated this vehicle. You couldn't hit a person and side swipe them, spin them off to the side, and have that and get a speed from those calculations.
So you're saying that the discipline of physics cannot figure out how far John O'Keefe's body would move, but you personally figured out that he would have flown now somewhat, or been projected somewhat 30 feet.
Objection.
Sir,
Sustained.
are you saying that the principles of physics are incapable of determining with the proper calculations how far John O'Keefe's body would have moved given the collision at issue?
Objection.
Is that what you're saying, Trooper?
No.
Okay, next question.
Well, you just said because it was a side swipe, all these calculations, these physics calculations are inapplicable, right?
I'm saying it would underestimate the speed and the distance.
The truth is, Trooper Paul, you have no idea what all these physics calculations mean, do you?
Objection.
Sustained.
You've not been trained in physics formally, have you?
Yes.
You have been,
It's incorporated into the classes.
right? You had a few classes that use the word physics, but you haven't been formally trained in physics, have you?
Objection.
Sustained.
You haven't been formally trained in kinematics, correct?
It's in the aspects of all our crash reconstruction classes.
You haven't been formally trained and hold no degrees in biomechanics, do you?
I do not have a degree in biomechanics.
In fact, basically what you did in this case was calculated ignition cycles. And you got those wrong, right?
Objection.
Sustained. Come on, Mr. Jackson. Ask the appropriate part of the question, you'll get it.
Let me ask you this. Based on your reconstruction, nearly 2-year investigation, exactly how was that taillight shattered? Explain it to us.
How does the taillight, what do you, it gets, so the taillight in this case was shattered when it was struck John O'Keefe's arm.
Exactly what part of his arm?
Based on what I saw for his injuries was from the upper part of his arm down.
Was his arm out? It just struck the arm like a hinge? Was it in front of him? You did the reconstruction?
It looked,
Here's exactly how his body was positioned when he was struck by that.
so it looks like his arm was more kind of like this, if I can try to get that.
You're indicating out by his side, correct?
Yes,
All right. And the taillight would have struck his arm, right?
yes,
Not his torso.
yes,
Okay. So the full mass, the full weight of that truck hit him basically at the elbow. Is that right?
No,
Missing his
no.
torso.
But I said it, yeah, from the upper part of the arm
Right.
down. Yeah,
The elbow and the biceps.
I didn't see anything that shows an indication that this lower torso was struck, but
Okay. So his torso,
it's not saying it could not have been a possibility, but I just didn't see anything.
so his torso was spared from being hit, but the arm took the brunt, the full force of the vehicle, correct?
Like arms and shoulder, yes.
Okay. And you said he then did a spin, like a sort of a pirouette.
He got spun around possibly the way it struck, it looked like it could have turned around counterclockwise.
Okay. So if he turns around counterclockwise, is he turning around in the air counterclockwise?
Yes, initially.
So he gets hit on the upper biceps, shoulder area, and down to the forearm, right?
Yes,
By an unbroken taillight, right?
yes,
In other words, it's nice and smooth. Nothing, no shards of plastic or anything broken at the time that it made contact with his arm, right?
correct.
Okay. So how did his arm get all cut up?
Because when his arm struck the taillight then cracked, and as the car is driving past him, the taillight could scratch it.
Got it. So he gets hit by the car, not his torso, just the arm. The taillight cracks, and as it passes by, his arm stays with it long enough to get striations, those scratches that you see, those lacerations, those abrasions that you see, right?
In a sense, yes.
And at the same time, he does a pirouette and flies 30 feet to his final point of rest.
I don't know if he did a pirouette.
Well, I'm using the word pirouette. He spun around.
He started rotating counterclockwise. I don't know how far he ran counterclockwise, but he started rotating. According to that, would push him to rotate counterclockwise. Whether or not he went counterclockwise all the way to his back toward the ground, it seems like a most likely possibility.
Did you account for the fact that his arm is on a hinge?
It's what? Say again?
Did you account for the fact in this scenario that you just told the jurors that his arm is on a hinge?
On a
Called his
hinge.
shoulder?
Okay.
Okay? So, the arm got hit. Didn't his arm just swing?
I said arm and shoulder area, so his arm could have been considered part of it.
Even if his shoulder got the upper,
Okay.
you're pointing to his upper biceps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no injuries on his shoulder. Not a single one. Not even a bruise. Right?
Like I said, it looked like to me it was from up here. I don't know how far I can up back here, but it was up here.
Well,
So
you're the one that talked about his injuries on his arm.
yes.
That's limited to about mid-biceps, to about mid-forearm, correct?
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
No injuries on the shoulder, no injuries on the torso, no injuries on the ribs, no injuries on the back, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
So your theory is you got hit on the arm, took the brunt of the force from the taillight on the arm, stayed with the vehicle long enough for the taillight to explode, basically, to shatter. Then these striations get on his arm, abrasions. Does a pirouette, spin counterclockwise and flies 30 feet in the air to his point of rest.
Yeah, it happened probably a little faster than that, though.
I thought you said he hit his head on the curb.
I said that's one of the possibilities of when you look at the roadway, as he gets spun around counterclockwise, it's a possibility that the curb is there, any blunt force object on the ground, as the ground is pretty blunt.
Well, except in your scenario, you just told us he flew through the air onto the light dusting of snow, grass, and dirt.
I didn't say through the air.
Say that again?
I didn't say he got thrown through the air.
Okay, I'll use your word. He got projected.
Projected doesn't mean it's not incorporating just throw. Project just means you get pushed forward. There's two parts of that. There's the air, then there's the ground. Like I said earlier, the tumbling, the rolling, whatever that part of the crash would happen. Projecting is just what we call what happens to a pedestrian post-impact with a crash.
Okay, so a couple questions. If his arm, elbow took the brunt of that entire impact, how do you account for the fact that he didn't suffer a broken bone?
I don't know.
How do you account for the fact that he didn't have a fracture?
Objection.
Sustained.
How do you account for the fact that he didn't even have a bruise on the arm?
Objection.
That's sustained.
They reproach.
Yes.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
Yes.
The truth is, Trooper Paul, you know, having investigated auto pedestrian accidents in the past, that John O'Keefe's injuries do not look anything like an automobile pedestrian accident, do they?
Yes, I do.
Isn't it true, Trooper Paul, you came to these opinions and conclusions because Trooper Proctor told you to come to these opinions and conclusions in furtherance of his investigation?
That is not true.
That's why you have these opinions and conclusions that just don't make sense, correct?
That is not true.
And you're just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Action.
Sustained. All right. Jurors will take the morning recess.